What separates the most valuable companies on the stock market from the rest of the pack? We currently have a number of companies with a valuation, a market cap of above $1 trillion. That's pretty incredible. Not too long ago, we didn't have one company that was above $1 trillion. So, what makes companies like Microsoft, Nvidia, Google, Amazon so valuable? And the answer is that these companies have a barrier to prevent competitors from coming into their markets and competing against them, competing against their products. And therefore, these companies continue to grow. They have great profit margins. They generate very free cash. So, what I intend on doing in my investments is trying to both find these really valuable companies at a discount and also find companies that have these barriers of entry, which are also called moats, and try to invest in those companies. These are going to be companies that have big advantages because they operate almost like a monopoly or an oligopoly. This is a very well known fact that companies that have very strong moats, very wide moats, tend to just be more valuable. Industries like pharmaceutical companies, technology companies that have these really strong patents keep their competitors from competing against these companies. So in this video, I wanted to go through my entire thought process as I evaluate moats and define what I believe are the strongest, widest types of moats and how I'm able to identify them and then rank them. So that way, when I'm looking at a company, I could determine, does that company have a really wide moat? Is it very strong? Can they keep competitors out of their markets? Do they have a lot of runway or total addressable market that they could sell their products in, which would make them very, very valuable? I'll go through and really define it and share that with you. And that's going to be one of the main areas of my analysis going forward as I look at companies and make a decision whether I want to buy, hold, or sell. Before I proceed further, just remember that I'm an individual investor, just sharing my experience, and I hope you find it interesting. I'm not providing any financial advice, and any company that I talk about, I'm not recommending you buy, hold, or sell it, buy options on them, or even short those stocks. And while I'm at it, let me just remind you that I'm being sponsored by Moomoo, which is a brokerage, and they offer new subscribers 8.1 interest on cash, which is a really nice yield right now. And after the first 3 months, it drops down to 5.1%. They'll also give you 15 free stocks if you open an account and deposit $1,000. So if you're interested in that, I'll put the details in the description of the video, and I appreciate you listening to that. So now let's get into how I define the best moats, the average moats, and the least desirable types of moats for companies. So how am I going to measure how strong and wide a moat is for a company? Well, I'm going to go through that by using this desirability quadrant that I created. And this basically ends up giving me the right classification of a company, whether they're really desirable or they're very undesirable. Let me take you through this image that I created. In the vertical axis, I've created the width and the strength of a moat. So that could be patents, competitive advantages, or maybe a company has really locked up a market within a particular region of the world. And second are barriers of entry. These could be legal licenses to sell into a company or a country. It could be certain patents, certain things that keep competitors from entering those markets for a given company. And the combination of the two, the width and the strength of the moat, as well as clear competitive advantages that a company has, are going to make a company more desirable or less desirable. I'm going to go through and define the most desirable companies here represented in green. And I'm also going to show medium desirable companies that are represented in gray in 2 boxes, actually. And then I'm going to go through companies that have the least desirability. These are companies that have the narrowest moats that are the weakest. Let's start with the most desirable moats first. What makes a very desirable moat? First, these are companies that are typically in high growth industries. These are new industries where the products are disrupting another previous generation of products or industries, and they have a lot of addressable markets. So these tend to be newer industries. For example, AI is brand new and it's really growing fast. And not too long ago, software companies were a brand new thing. Software didn't exist 50 years ago, and software companies became really valuable. as well as pharmaceutical companies. Those tend to have high growth areas because pharmaceutical companies may create a new drug that cures certain illnesses. These companies tend to have a monopoly like uh, operation. And if they have the right intellectual property or the right ideas or just really tremendous market share, they stand to really act like a monopoly. Again, they can have patents to really limit competition. And there's a real optimism about their future because they have a lot of addressable market and they just have a lot of momentum. What makes them valuable is they generate a lot of free cash. You look at the most valuable companies, it's consistent. They operate with a lot of free cash. They have high revenue growth. They have a strong balance sheet because they generate so much cash. They could pay off all their debts and just carry a really nice cash balance. They have very high profit margins. And the reason for it is if they don't have excessive competition, they can really command really good prices and continue to grow. So that's what makes the most desirable companies in this highly desirable zone. Now let me go over companies with medium desirability. And these, I'm going to start with medium desirability that has a wide and strong moat, but not a very strong barrier of entry to their competitors. These tend to be mature companies that have been operating for a long time. For example, Coca-Cola. Now, you could argue that Coca-Cola is sugar water, so they probably have many competitors, and they do. But Coca-Cola has such a strong brand, it's so recognized, it's in so many restaurants that it tends to really keep its market share and grow very slowly. Their brand is really much of the equity of the company. They have low revenue growth. Again, Coca-Cola doesn't grow all that fast. Competition does exist. Profits are moderate, and they have moderate free cash flow. And they tend to be really nice dividend payers. So investors like those types of stocks. They're looking for income. Now, getting away from a really wide and strong moat, which typically is where a company's operated in a market and really established its brand as a leader in that industry, and we get into barriers of entry. Maybe a company does have some strategic advantages like a patent or something that keeps competitors away, but the width and strength of that moat isn't very high. Maybe there's substitute products to that particular product that the company sells. There's a lot of reasons why the width and strength of the moat may not exist. Now, these companies, again, tend to be mature, long-standing businesses. And these businesses could be insurance companies. Maybe insurance companies have the capital to write policies, but there's a lot of different insurance companies. There's a high startup cost related to these companies. So a, a competitive advantage or a barrier of entry could be that, let's say automotive, you have to spend so much capital starting a factory that it really prevents competitors from easily coming into that market. And that capital requirement becomes the barrier of entry. Maybe there's regulation and you have to pay a lot of money just to be licensed to operate in that industry. Competition does exist, but it's not excessive. And there's moderate profits, moderate free cash flow. And these also tend to be high dividend payers. So I'm thinking of like an AT&T as well. They tend to really lure investors by paying high dividends. And now let's talk about the least desirable types of companies. And these are companies that have very narrow and weak moats. They don't really have any barriers of entry or competitive advantages. These are typically old industries that are kind of going away. For example, the newspaper business. Boy, they were really strong 60, 70 years ago. But ever since the internet became a reality, everybody gets their news online, and there's no need for newspapers. They have decreasing revenues. Another example is TV stations. Everybody's streaming now, so TV stations are really decreasing their revenues. They have negative cash flows in many cases. They're unprofitable. They have risky balance sheets because they don't generate a lot of cash. Their revenues are going down. They're being disrupted by other companies or other new companies that have created a better mousetrap and is disrupting their industry. They have many competitors fighting over a smaller marketplace. There's a pessimistic future. This is the zone where I try to stay away from companies in this zone because really the long-term play doesn't look very good at all. Let me go through some examples of highly desirable companies, medium desirability companies, and then really low desirability companies. So the most desirable are companies like Microsoft, just has a lot of products, a lot of patents, great brand, great momentum. They're in the AI space, and they are the most valuable company in the world. NVIDIA has the fastest GPUs right now, and those are in really high demand. Eli Lilly has the best patents on drugs, and they continue to grow, and they become one of the most valuable companies on the stock market. Amazon's the number one e-commerce company, and they have a fabulous cloud business in AWS. So just a leading company that really shows that they're very different, very unique, and very valuable to its customers. Companies in the medium desirability that I believe have a wide and strong moat are companies like CVS. It's really hard to have pharmacies across the country, and they're also a healthcare payer. Or a company like Broadcom that has a good number of chipsets that go into different devices. PayPal with its network, it's really operating well around the world. And Hewlett Packard, a very well recognized brand in the PC business as well as other technology products. So these companies tend to have a nice wide, strong moat, but don't have a lot of barriers for entry. For example, Hewlett Packard sells PCs that Dell can also sell and Lenovo can sell. So it has competitors. It doesn't have a monopoly like operation. For example, Microsoft has almost a monopoly like presence in certain markets. NVIDIA has a monopoly like presence in the GPU market. So these companies like PayPal, they don't have, online transactions locked up. They have to compete, but they have a very good brand. So as we look at these types of companies, they have very good brands. They're very strong companies, but they don't have a way of keeping their competitors away. Now let me cover companies that have medium desirability based on the barriers of entry and competitive advantage that they have, but at the same time, they don't have wide and strong moats. And companies that I think of in this category is like Comcast. They have movie titles that they get to control. So that's a nice barrier of entry into their markets. But Comcast has to compete against a lot of different media companies, and content like YouTube is being produced every day. Companies like CareTrust REIT, which operates living buildings for elderly people that also need healthcare where they live, and they have really good properties. You can't just build these properties, willy-nilly. So they have that advantage, that competitive advantage. But other competitors can come into the market and start building buildings, in the communities where they serve. Allstate has really good brand recognition. They have the resources and capital, and they also have really good relationships to insure people. So that's a barrier of entry against its competition. Yet there's a lot of insurance products out there, and there's a lot of other companies that would love to compete for their business. And the last one is Zim. Zim is a shipping company, and you just can't buy a ship overnight. You have to order it, wait a few years, and then put it into service. And Zim has a great fleet of ships, and that's their barrier of entry. They can carry cargo around the world, but other shipping companies exist, and they do have a fair amount of competition. So their moat isn't very wide and it's not very strong. Now let me cover the least desirable quadrant, and those are companies that have excessive competition. They're in industries that are really decaying and going away. Companies that I think about there are like companies like GameStop. Online video games could be sold, they could be downloaded, streamed, and GameStop just doesn't have a place in today's economy. Or Macy's, which Macy's, the concept was created 100 years ago when retail was really something. Now they just struggle to grow just a little bit, but most years, really, the revenues are going down. They have to hire a lot of people, and they have constant competition from other retailers as well as online. You have companies like Young Brands. They operate Taco Bell, KFC, The Habit, Pizza Hut. You think about the amount of competition that you have in restaurants, it's just excessive. And they have to hire a lot of employees. Their profit margins are tiny. They have to rent really expensive retail space. Just a lot of forces that really prevent a company like this from being really, really profitable, prevents them from generating a lot of free cash flow, really prevents them from having a positive long-term future. The last example is Gray. This is a media company, and this is made up of a lot of TV stations, and television stations are just not going anywhere. It just seems like their economy keeps getting smaller and smaller while the streamers and online companies like YouTube continue to get larger and larger. So this is a space where I try to stay away from investments in this area. So what are the investing plays within each quadrant? Let me go over that. So first, with the highly desirable quadrant, this is a strong moat, and these companies tend to be really desirable. And it's no secret which companies are the best. And these are companies that I try to invest in at a discount or a fair price. And if I find one of these companies that's being discounted, it's a great stock to buy. I recently bought into Apple. It was being discounted and I bought it and I made a quick 20% return and then I sold the stock. Thank you, Mr. Market, for that deal. They're a long-term hold typically. Like, for example, I've held Meta for a long time. I've held Alphabet, Google for a long time. I've held Airbnb for a while. Chevron I've held for a long time. And your return tends to be in the form of the stock price appreciating And that's where the yield is. It's not necessarily in the dividend because these companies tend to pay no dividend or very small dividend. And I buy more over time. And the reason for it is the market tends to discount stocks, every once in a while. So when the buying is good, I load up on that stock and I hold it over time. For medium desirability companies, I look for high discounts on these companies because they're potentially never going to be one of these highly desirable companies. So it's important to really know that I'm getting a good discount. The near-term economy needs to favor these companies. There needs to be some tailwinds that I think are going to help the company over the next 2 years. They tend to pay dividends, so I'm happy to collect dividends. And it could be a nice swing trade where I see a stock really being sold off unfairly, highly discounted, and I pick it up. And really in the gray zone, the investing play is the same, just based on factors of the width and strength of the moat or the barriers of entry would put them in either one of these boxes. Now, the weak companies, I avoid the low desirability quadrant, and I avoid investing in here. And the reason for it is simple. Over the course of time, these companies their value just keeps depreciating and depreciating. So why would I want to buy into something like that? They may be a short-term trade. It may be the near-term economy is really going to favor them, so I'm going to be in and out, or I may short some of these stocks. So these are only rare situations. I tend to really just stay out of this zone because this zone is just, most of the time it's just a money losing situation. I'd rather just, really be patient and buy into this zone, especially since cash is getting a 5% yield. What's the sense in buying low quality companies when you can get 5% on cash? So as you can tell, I've really put some time and energy into really defining the 4 quadrants where I could fit a company into. And I'll be using that on my videos going forward. For example, I started to look at Dell, and I'm going to put Dell in the medium desirability quadrant. I think they are a good company. They have a very good brand, but they're pretty much like Hewlett Packard. They really are a company where you got to get a good discount. You got to understand that they have a tailwind and buy at the right time. So that's my video on the desirability of companies based on the width and the strength of their moats and the barriers of entry and competitive advantage that companies have. I hope you found it interesting, and I really appreciate you watching.